can start, madam. Let me just start the recording.
Start the recording. Yeah.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Start. You can start, madam.
Okay. Good evening, all. Warm welcome, dear PGs, to the 7th and the last module of our PG training clinical exam crash course series. And the topic for discussion is on oculoplasty and orbit. And to teach you, to guide you, and to clear your doubts, we have here with us a well-known national and international faculty, a great teacher, a PG mentor, none other than our Dr. Fairoz PM. Warm and hearty welcome, Dr. Fairoz, to our PG training program.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, now PGs, it's an interactive session, so please be free to ask questions, clear your doubts, and utilize this golden opportunity. We are very lucky to have Dr. Fairoz as our faculty today, so please utilize it to the maximum. Let me also welcome Dr. Nirmal, our member scientific committee, and he is a pediatric consultant at Comptus Eye Hospital. Now over to Nirmal for the rest of the proceedings. Thank you all.
Thank you, madam. First of all, we extend our gratitude to Fairoz madam for accepting this invitation in spite of her definitely busy schedule. Fairoz madam is a specialist in ophthalmic plastic surgery, orbit and ocular oncology from Bangalore. She is the founder and director of the Horus Specialty Eye Care, the unique concept of one-stop specialty eye care and eye plastic surgery and eye cancer. She is a recipient of American Academy of Ophthalmology Achievement Award in 2015 and APAO Achievement Award in 2017 for academic excellence. Currently the section editor of IJO. Madam introduced the 1 minute ophthalmology to IJO. She graduated from APAO leadership program in 2019 and also holds position as scientific chair for Asia Pacific Ocular Oncology Pathology Society. She was recently elected as the member scientific committee of AIOS, and she is one among the top 100 most influential female ophthalmologists in the world as ranked by the Ophthalmologist American Journal. That is the least possible introduction I think we can give to Fairoz madam. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Nirmal, and thank you, Dr. Vijayalakshmi, for this kind invitation. Spending time with PGs have always been a pleasure for me, and I am extremely honored to be here today. I hope we have almost 44 people, PGs here. Are they all postgraduates, ma'am?
Yes, madam.
Except for a few of our members, rest of them are PGs, madam.
PGs, okay. So
yeah.
I'm just going to share my slide and then we will see how we are going to deal with it. So there will be a lot of interaction since we have time with us. So this is how I'm going to take through the oculoplasty session over here. I am a pretty cool teacher. So you can just interact with me. You should not doubt or don't shy away from answering. I have also gone through this postgraduate program. And in fact, the current generation of postgraduates are much, much better than how we were before. You know, everything is in your fingertip. Google is there. Wikipedia is there. So we didn't have all these things. We had to go back to the library, take the textbook and then read. All right, so we are going to keep it really, really, really interactive. So among the 44, can I have 2 PGs who can volunteer for the eyelid section? And I would want their name.
Betty?
Betty? Ma'am, you just give the name. I'll take care of them.
Yeah, that will be better, I guess.
That will be better. Betty, are you there?
Yes, madam.
Yes, Betty is ready.
Perfect. Who is the second person?
Shabiba.
Thank you, ma'am. Detty, put your camera on. We are going to have some fun. Yeah. Shabiba is there or she's hiding?
Shabiba,
madam,
you're on duty.
Madam. Yes, madam.
Okay. What about Aparna? Aparna, can you come up? Aparna?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Aparna
very
is
good.
going to be
Madam,
very
you have two people ready here.
And we are okay. Now, Detty is a final year PG from Calicut Medical College.
Yes, madam.
And Aparna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Ma'am, I am third year PG from Chaitanya Eye Hospital, Trivandrum.
Trivandrum, perfect. So we have Detty and Aparna here for the eyelid section. Okay, so it's going to be a discussion. You can ask your friends. You can take help from your friends also. Phone your friend. All right. No Googling. Promise. All
Yes,
right.
ma'am.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So the first case, Detty is going to take care of this now. Okay, so we are going to deal with eyelids. We will see a few cases and then discuss what is important as far as practical exam is concerned, and a little bit of things where, you know, it will be useful for you in your theory also. So Detty, what do you think? I mean, you don't have to give me a diagnosis here. Okay, that's not, if you can, that will be very, very good. So what do you think it is in this patient?
Yeah.
Detty? What are you seeing? What is a glaringly seen visible finding, clinical finding in this patient? If it comes as a OSCE for you in your exam.
Preseptal cellulitis with ectropion and exposure.
Exposure, preseptal
Correct.
cellulitis, why do you, patient, okay, I'll give you the history. Patient doesn't have pain. And this has been there as a child, long-standing. And he is 35-year-old male. Preseptal cellulitis, what do you expect? It is an acute onset, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah. So leave the preseptal cellulitis apart. So there is an ectropion, the eyelid is thickened, right? And that's probably why you thought there is a preseptal cellulitis, right? And
Yes.
there is exposure of
Conjunctiva and lower portion of maybe the lid closure may be inadequate, maybe.
okay. So whenever you talk, so it is basically a lower lid ectropion with a thickened eyelid. All right. So when you talk about ectropion, you grade it. There is a grading for ectropion.
Yes, madam. Grade 1, inversion of the margin. Grade 2, exposure of the fornices.
Fornix is grade 2.
Fornix is grade 3, madam.
Margin, tarsus, fornix, correct? It is basically anatomy. It is you have to apply your logic there. Okay, it's margin, it will be the lower tarsal conjunctiva, then you reach to the fornix, and the entire eyelid in the grade 4 will be turned outward. So this is almost a grade 4 ectropion. Okay, now you have to know the etiology of ectropion. What are the causes of ectropion? The most common cause of ectropion is
Senile.
senile ectropion. Other than that, Aparna, you can also help.
Cicatricial.
Okay.
Cicatricial mechanical.
Okay. Cicatricial and mechanical. So do you want to put it in any of those box here? You can take your help of your friends also if you want. You can call up their name.
If anybody else, madam, excuse me, madam, if anybody else knows, can they answer, unmute and answer, madam?
Yes, they can answer. They can answer.
Yeah, Shabiba, if you can on the audio, video, just on your audio and answer, if you know the. Roshna, Shabiba.
Okay, so Aparna, confused? Yeah, I'll give you a clue. I am going to give a clue for everyone over here, okay?
Okay.
All right. Yeah. This is the anterior segment evaluation of this patient. First clue. If you get it right, I'll be parceling an Amazon gift voucher for you.
Sorry, ma'am. Don't know, ma'am.
What do you find in the anterior segment evaluation? Normal? It is the right eye, in fact. No? Second clue?
Yes, ma'am.
Second clue.
Neurofibromatosis.
Who said that? Aparna?
No, ma'am. Somebody else, ma'am.
Who's that somebody else? Your name, please. Hello.
Sumisha.
Sumisha, please. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Sumisha. Yeah. So what are the things that you've seen here to say that it is neurofibromatosis? Sumisha, quick, we don't have time. Otherwise, we'll sit here the whole day, or we will do part 2 the next week. Come on, quick.
Yeah,
Ashwati, yeah, you can answer Ashwati.
Sumisha already answered, ma'am. Let Sumisha tell it. Sumisha, come on, quick.
I think
Why do you say
Sumisha's
that?
got a net issue, I think.
Net issue. Okay, okay.
Yeah, because she's not.
Okay. Anyone else, quickly?
Leash nodules over the iris.
Yes, leash nodules over the iris. All right. And then you find these neurofibromatosis nodule. Aparna, can't you find that in the iris? You
Yes,
see the
sir.
nodules
Yes,
over the iris? Yeah.
Yes,
Why would I show a normal anterior segment iris picture? So attention to details are very, very important. All right. So just examining the eye, it's more than that. It is a regular ophthalmological examination. There will be some clue in every part of the eye if you're confused with that particular case. Okay. So this is a case of a lower lid neurofibromatosis presenting as an ectropion. Now, what kind of an ectropion is this?
Mechanical.
Mechanical ectropion.
Mechanical.
Okay, yeah. So this is a mechanical ectropion. Okay, so now we go on to the next case. Yeah, neurofibroma. And this is how we treat it. You know, we debulk it and then we do a lateral canthoplasty and then we fix it. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the answer is already there. I'm so sorry. Okay, so this is again not an entropion, right? Yeah, it looks like an entropion where the lashes are turned inwards, but there is a skin fold which is pushing the lash, okay? Rather than a common finding in an entropion. So this is called an epiblepharon. Okay, so whenever you have an entropion or an epiblepharon with an abnormal lash, it could be a trichiatic lash, which is, you have to look for keratopathy. In fact, this child had an inferior, not a child, she was in her late teens, and she had keratopathy also. So anterior segment evaluation in a case of eyelid is very, very, very important. So this is a case of epiblepharon. Does everyone knows about epiblepharon? What is the cause of epiblepharon? And what is the treatment, if you know about it? I think it's even there in Kansky. I remember during my time reading it.
Just an extra fold of skin parallel to the lid margin.
Okay. And most common in which race? These are very basic questions. And if you get an OSCE or a short case, these are the questions which is going to be asked to you. Which race and which age group do you usually find this?
Asian.
Asians, right. Yeah, okay. The Chinese, the Mongolese, we are all Asians. Indians are also, so you find it in the Southeast Asian countries, especially in Chinese. She's a Tibetan patient. Okay, it's because of the structure of their face. So they have a extra fold of skin. So what is the treatment for it? What do you do?
Everting sutures.
Everting sutures, if it is very, very mild, yes. Basically, there is an extra fold of skin. There is also, the muscle is also there, which is, kind of letting the eyelashes overrise. So what we do is like a skin muscle excision in these cases. So this is just 3 weeks after the surgery. And we do a ciliary incision, and gradually even the scar will fade away. So that is what is about a lower eyelid anomaly over here. So going on to eyelids, it's very, very important to know the anatomy. So when we generally take the anatomy of the eyelid, we divide it into anterior lamellae and the posterior lamellae. Okay, anterior lamellae consists of
Skin and orbicularis.
Skin and subcutaneous tissue, including orbicularis, and the posterior lamellae consists of
tarsoconjunctiva.
Tarsoconjunctiva. So that is very, very important to identify any disease and even application of any management. So now, when you talk about the anatomy, it's so very important to know the muscles, the periocular muscles. So you all know this, right? Which muscle is this one?
procerus.
And this one is?
Corrugator superciliaris.
Correct. And this is, everything is there in fact.
Frontalis.
Frontalis. Okay. It's a frontalis part of the occipitofrontalis muscle. All right. Yes. And then you have the orbicularis oculi. How do you divide orbicularis oculi?
Palpebral part and orbital part.
Okay.
Then palpebral part can be again as preseptal and pretarsal.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So these are the basic things that you need to know. Now I'm going to show you something over here. Okay. Yeah. So why are these things important is like, knowing the anatomy of certain disorders like this, like benign essential blepharospasm. When both the eyelids are involved, we call it as benign essential blepharospasm. All right. So wherever the muscles are affected, that's where, what is the treatment of BEB?
Botox.
Tell me.
Botulinum toxin
I can't hear
injection.
you, upper. Yeah.
Botox injections, ma'am.
Botox injection, right. So these muscles are important in certain oculoplasty diseases and treatment where you give Botox injection to that particular muscle. All right. So you give injection to the orbicularis, you would treat the procerus, you would treat the corrugator, and also a bit of frontalis in this case. Okay. Now this is a case of hemifacial spasm. All right. Hemifacial spasm is again abnormality of the periocular muscles, where one side of the face will be involved. These cases probably can, ma'am, do you keep all these cases for exams like an OSCE or a short case? Vijayalakshmi, ma'am?
See, madam, our students are DNB candidates.
Okay.
So
they go to other places?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Ours is not an examination center. Sandhya, do you keep there?
No. We usually don't keep these cases.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So this is why you need to know about the periocular muscular anatomy also, because there are certain diseases which is associated with it. All right. Now we go on to the next layer of the eyelid. All right. So what are the layers that you see here? And this is very important theoretically also. Okay. What do you see here?
LPS aponeurosis, capsulopalpebral fascia, MPL, and lateral palpebral ligament. Then tarsus.
Okay, so where you are not seeing LPS? Only aponeurosis?
Yes, no, LPS and its aponeurosis.
LPS and its aponeurosis. Okay, so again, the anatomy of upper eyelid, the muscles of the upper eyelid, the retractors of the upper eyelid, you should be very, very well versed with it, because this also comes as a theoretical question for you. Okay, so there is, whenever we talk about upper eyelid, lower eyelid, actually the muscular component is the mirror of the upper eyelid. So you have the LPS over there, you have the Wittnall's ligament, you also have the Muller's muscle. All right. Yeah. Now in the lower eyelid also, which is usually not too much spoken about, there are lower eyelid retractors as well. What are lower eyelid retractors? What is this anatomy that you see over here?
Capsulopalpebral fascia.
Okay. And the lower eyelid retractors, where is it? How important it is?
Lower lid retraction can cause.
So capsulopalpebral fascia is what?
It is an expansion of tendon of inferior rectus.
Correct. Okay, so it's an expansion of the inferior rectus muscle and it goes around the inferior oblique. Okay, so the inner part of the capsulopalpebral fascia is where we have a smooth muscle, which is the lower eyelid retractor or the inferior tarsal muscle. And what is the clinical application of that particular muscle? Why is it so important? What is the role of that muscle? And if that is detached, what happens? When LPS gets detached, ptosis happens. Okay, we don't have to talk much about it. What happens when the lower lid retractor or the tarsal muscle gets detached?
Lid retraction and ectropion.
Ectropion. Yeah, yes. So there will be basically an inferior scleral show, which will be more visible, and ectropion. The cause of ectropion is detachment of the lower eyelid retractor. All right. So these are the things which is very, very important. Now going on to LPS, how many millimeters of, eyelid lift does LPS cause?
Initial 2 millimeters is by Muller's.
Great.
Then frontalis also cause 2 millimeter elevation.
Yes.
And
perfect.
And LPS can cause up to it is responsible for more than 15 millimeter.
Yes. Okay. So around 15 to 18 millimeters is caused by the LPS. These are again the questions which will be asked to you. All right. Yeah. Now, apart from this, so basically, as I told you, blepharoptosis is what you need to know. Anything which is happening to the upper eyelid retractor causes ptosis, and anything which is causing the lower eyelid retractor causes ectropion. And this is one of the factor of senile ectropion. What are the other factors of senile ectropion?
Overriding of the pre-septal part of the orbicularis over the pre-tarsal part. Horizontal laxity of the lower lid. Weakening of the MPL and LPL.
Yes.
Then loss of fat tissue.
Absolutely. Very good, ma'am. Your students are very, very smart. All right. Yes. So these are the causes of ectropion, apart from all those things. So again, understanding the ligaments, as you already told, you gave me all the causes. You have the tarsus, you have the ligaments. This basically has the tarsus as the ligaments on either side, the medial canthal ligament and the lateral canthal ligament has got a trampoline effect over the tarsus. When it becomes loose, the tarsus falls out, or it can even fall inside. So entropion can also be caused due to the when there is no stability of the ligaments as well. Excellent. So now we go on to the first case. So so this again is a patient who's presenting with watering over here. All right, very, very subtle ectropion. Even a subtle ectropion like this with a horizontal lid laxity can cause watering in a patient. So you don't have to treat these patients with chronic, topical lubricants, thinking it is a dry eye. As you can see here, first thing that you have to evaluate in an eyelid whenever you see a patient in the slit lamp is the puncta. All right, whether the puncta is opposed to the lacus lacrimalis. If not, there is a medial ectropion. This patient definitely has a medial ectropion, which is more in the right when compared to the left side. And the watering is the main cause of watering is the mild lower lid laxity that the patient has. So these are the certain tests that we should be doing in our clinic. I'm sure all of you know this. Okay, the pinch test, that you pinch the lower eyelid and see how it is. The lateral distraction test. So according to how much the distraction is, you will be grading. Okay, depending upon that, also you diagnose whether there is a medial involvement, the lateral involvement, or a diffuse involvement of the lower eyelid. Okay. So the next test is the snap back test. Like, we hold the eyelid and we snap it back. In a horizontal lid laxity, the snap back test will be positive. Okay, so this is basically how you examine an ectropion case. You have a patient over here. You can see that there is a lower lid ectropion. Okay, so on traction, you can see it is very, very lax. There is a complete horizontal laxity of the eyelid. You're pinching it and seeing. You're trying to snap it. Well, when you snap it, it's not snapping at all. All right. So whenever you find you're given a case of an ectropion, or even in the clinic, when you have to evaluate these patients, this is how you evaluate the patient and then you grade it. Now, how do you treat it? This might be a question to you. So the lateral tarsal strip procedure, you know that the laxity is here. So you actually go expose the tarsal strip with the canthotomy, and then you attach to the, which is what is the part in the orbital margin where the lateral canthal tendon is attached?
In this procedure, we used to take periorbital bites.
Yeah, but where is the lateral canthal tendon attached?
Orbital tubercle.
What tubercle is it?
Lateral check ligaments.
That is ligament, no? Where is it attached? So anatomically, when I'm taking the bite through the periorbita, I'm not going superficial. I almost want to reach the anatomical attachment of the lateral canthal ligament, correct? And all of you, as a postgraduate student, if you're interested in oculoplastic surgery, these are very simple procedures that can be done by each of you. It's not a difficult procedure at all. All right, so where do you go and attach it? What is the anatomy? These are quick questions. Anyone? It is a tubercle. What is the name?
Vitinal's tubercle.
Vitinal's tubercle. Did you Google?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am, no.
No, okay. Fine, all right. Okay, so it is attached almost very close to the Vitinal's tubercle, which is inside. And this is how the patient looks like, all right, after the treatment. So I just wanted to put it here just because, again, you know, I indicated that surgically there are certain oculoplastic procedures that can be done by a postgraduate student. It's not too difficult. So this was I want all of you to go and read this article. This is an ophthalmology surgical competency assessment for the lateral tarsal strip surgery. Okay. And this is basically for the postgraduate student. In fact, you can assess yourself. It's very, very tiny. So where they have assessed a novice surgeon, a beginner, an advanced beginner, and a competent, of course, you know, the consultants who have done a lot. An advanced beginner would be a fellow, and probably the PGs will fall in somewhere between novice and beginner. So this is an excellent paper that I would want you all to go and learn. And, you know, if at all you're interested in oculoplasty, it will help you in assessing yourself. Now, this is, Detty has disappeared. Detty, come. Next is you. What is this? Male patient. If you want any
cicatricial ectropion.
Cicatricial ectropion. You want any history? No, you're bright. Okay, so this was a case of a road traffic accident. Okay, he had a huge fracture. A primary repair of the eyelid was done. And I'm sure all of you in your emergency land up getting such RTA cases where you might land up doing the primary repair of the eyelid. Okay, now this is how he was referred to me after a primary lid repair and the fracture repair by the facial-maxillary surgeon. So this is how his 3D reconstruction CT scan image look like. Okay, so he has lots of plates and screws where a facial-maxillary surgeon has fixed the maxilla, the zygoma, as well as the roof and the zygoma over here. So he has all these plates and screws over here, and there is this fibrous band, the cicatrix, which is pulling it down. In fact, even the primary repair has not been done properly. Okay, so let's see. So this is basically a cicatrical ectropion in this patient. So what we did here was, you know, in fact, this is the eyelid, the lateral eyelid margin. In fact, he had a lateral margin. I didn't even add a margin. So it was just releasing this margin from here, the real anatomical margin of his lower eyelid, and we just had to go and refix over there. In fact, you know, cicatrical ectropion is usually treated with skin graft, and then he was treated with skin graft. And yeah, so that is how it looks like. And this is what how he looks like before and after. So as you see here, he had a lid margin. It's just that when the primary repair was done, they thought that the lid margin is not there, and they had gone and taken a flap, which was not required at that point of time. So you have to, again, look into the attention of detail. And all these eyelid reconstruction, trauma patients, it's basically as if you're playing with a puzzle. The tissues will be there somewhere. It's just that you have to find the tissue and put those stone tissues in place. It's absolutely like a puzzle until and unless there is a huge laceration and there is a tissue loss. Now, this is yet another case. Would you think this is an ectropion which is traumatic? There is a history of trauma in this patient. If you want more details, I will ask you. Amin. With the history of trauma, what do you think this would be? Detty? Again, an ectropion. Very simple cases, no complicated cases here. What is something that you're seeing here more than an ectropion?
Fistula in the lower lid.
Fistula in the lower lid. Perfect. Okay, so there is a lot of inflammation. There is discharge there. So he had a trauma. What trauma could it have been? If you want to ask me a question, I can answer about the history. How does a fistula form?
Some penetrating
trauma. Okay, so he had a wooden stick injury, in fact, where he says the wooden stick was taken out and he was feeling fine. And this has been persistent for the past 3 years. So for the past 3 years, he has a discharging sinus. So in this particular case, what do you do? You just correct the eyelid? Do you want to evaluate more? How would you evaluate this patient?
We have to look for orbit osteomyelitis.
Osteomyelitis also, yes. I mean, if at all he did not have a history of trauma, tuberculosis.
Yes.
Okay, osteomyelitis is yet another cause of a sinus and an ectropion, cicatricial ectropion. So what do you want to do now as a next step?
We have to send for culture culture of the discharge.
So you're directly taking him into the operation theater, right? Taking sample and sending it for microbiology and culture. Yeah. You don't want to know anything else. Why is it happening so? What could be the reason? Aparna. Next year, you will be practicing. You'll be seeing these patients in your OPD.
Nice. Retained foreign body, madam.
Retained foreign body, yes. So what would you want to do now? You have to image these patients, all right? Very, very important. Whenever you find a history of trauma and there is a draining sinus, even if it is an osteomyelitis, Aparna, you want to know how bad the bone is, right? How much is the bone affected, right? So what you need to know is an imaging. Imaging is so very important before you take up the patient into the operation theater. In fact, he has a foreign body which is sitting over there. And it was a wooden foreign body, as you can see here, a large wooden foreign body causing a lot of abscess. And in fact, this is very close to the inferior rectus muscle, and he had a limitation of the ocular motility also. So all those things have to be checked, even clinically, when you have these discharging sinus. And it was causing a foreign body granuloma. So this was the wooden foreign body which was sitting inside this large granuloma, and a sinus which was coming outside. So there are certain situations, even in an eyelid simple ectropion, where you might have to go in and image the patients. Okay, and that is exactly why I had put this case today over here. All right, clear?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And this is how he looks like. The only thing that we did is like we went through the, sinus, went inside, came outside, and then we didn't even have to do a lateral tarsal strip procedure or anything. Not even a skin graft was required. We just took a flap because he's an old patient. There's a lot of loose skin over there. It's just placing skin here and there. And this is how he was treated. Now, we'll go on to other eyelid anomalies over here. So this is a congenital blepharoptosis, a child presenting with blepharoptosis. Would you want to add something more into it?
BPAS, telecanthus, then epicanthus inversus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, BPAS, do you want to expand it for the benefit of the audience?
Blepharophimosis, ptosis, and ectropion, epicanthus inversus syndrome.
Okay, all right. So it's basically blepharophimosis syndrome, okay, which has many, many criteria to it. And there is a classification also. So what kind of, how do you classify congenital blepharoptosis?
Congenital ptosis can be simple ptosis or associated with any syndromes like Merkus-Janszow-Vinking or
Correct. So basically, it is a simple blepharoptosis or a complex blepharoptosis. So this is a complex blepharoptosis.
Complex blepharoptosis.
So that will be your first diagnosis. From that, in the complex blepharoptosis, again, you look for what are, as you said, Marcus-Gunn-Jaw winking. There can be aberrant third nerve, issues, Horner syndrome, blepharophimosis syndrome. So these come into the complex congenital blepharoptosis. So this is a case of complex congenital blepharoptosis. Okay. Now, so I always put this slide in any postgraduate training program, but because this was an essay, a 10-mark essay, which came for my postgraduate examination. I didn't know the classification. All right. So the question was blepharophimosis syndrome and classification. So this is, so everywhere I go, right from the beginning, I put this slide because I went and read it after my exam, after my theory exam. So there are certain classification, and it's called the congenital tetrad syndrome. That is something that you have to know. You don't have to, it should be in the tip of your tongue. There are, tetra means there are four features which is there in blepharophimosis syndrome. Blepharophimosis, where the palpebral fissure is narrowed. Then you have horizontal palpebral fissure, then you have ptosis, then the epicanthus inversus and the telecanthus. Now, depending upon the clinical findings, as well as you all know that they can be associated primary ovarian failure, especially in female, not especially, in females with blepharophimosis syndrome. So that also gets classified into type 1 and type 2. Okay, so when a female patient presents with blepharophimosis syndrome, it's very, very important to investigate them primarily, systemically also, to rule out ovarian failure. All right. So these are few things that, so now again, when you get the patient like this, when would you want to intervene? Would you intervene in both the cases, or what would you want to do?
If the pupillary area is not covered, we can wait.
Okay, so both the, so two cases are over here. Would you intervene in these cases? Case number 1 is this on your left, and case number 2 is on your right. Would you intervene in both the cases or observe? What would you want to do?
In case 1, we have to intervene early because this pupillary area is covered. So there is a risk of development of amblyopia.
Okay.
In type 2, pupillary area is visible.
Visible, correct. Absolutely. Okay, so amblyopia is definitely a concern in these patients. So I would intervene in case 1, but I wouldn't intervene in case 2. Wait for the child to grow and probably deal with it cosmetically at a later stage. Okay, so well, so the two things, again, what you want to evaluate in these patients is looking for the corneal reflex as well as the head posture. So if there is a very bad head posture, that is also an indication for taking up for surgery. All right. And this child underwent a very simple tarsofrontal sling, with an Ethibond suture. And of course, the child is awaited for further cosmetic rehabilitation later. So when it is this child, in fact, have severe amblyopia, but still, he came for management at a very later stage. And when it's a older child, we would go for a complete cosmetic rehabilitation as well, where he underwent medial and lateral canthoplasty and frontalis sling surgery. And this is how he looks like. And he is on his amblyopia therapy at this point of time. So why I'm talking a lot on ptosis here, because this is one of the cases for your practical examination as a postgraduate that you would get, in eyelid. So this is the basic classification, simple and complex. And then you have acquired. Most common is aponeurotic. You can have myogenic, neurogenic, mechanical, and traumatic. And in fact, traumatic involves everything. It could be a neurogenic cause, it could be a myogenic cause, or even an aponeurotic, where the aponeurosis has detached from the tarsus. Now, so when you talk about blepharoptosis, so do you want to diagnose this? Give me just a diagnosis.
Congenital ptosis.
Congenital ptosis.
Simple ptosis.
Simple ptosis, whether it is, which eye is affected?
Both
Both eyes. Okay, this is how you have to say. You have to classify. I already taught you classification. Okay, so you have to say, you just cannot say ptosis. In fact, he has a asymmetric bilateral ptosis over here, where right eye is more than the left eye. All these things has to. So as a good student, this is how you have to, first think about it, put the points in your head before even you speak up. You can take time. You don't have to jump and give your answer. Just take time, look at everything, and very, very systematically and in an organized way, put the wordings correctly, and then you give an diagnosis. All right. So very classical of a congenital ptosis is what? Lower lid retraction. Down gaze, upper lid retraction. When you look at down gaze, there is an upper lid retraction. So when you look at this child, well, sometimes you might see it's only a right eye ptosis. In fact, the parents said it's only a right eye ptosis. But when you're doing this very classical test of down gaze in these patients, you can see equal retraction of the upper lid. And then you can say, no, it's not only one eye, both eyes there is ptosis. You see there is an abnormality in both the eyes. All right. Yeah. So it's a bilateral ptosis. Whereas in this child, it is a
right eye ptosis.
Right eye, unilateral, congenital, simple ptosis. Okay. And if you want to say, you can even say it is a mild ptosis. Okay. You can also grade it, whether it is mild, moderate, or severe. All right. Yeah. So it's kind of a mild ptosis. Now we're talking about complex blepharoptosis. What is this? A small baby.
Marcus-Gunn-Joe-Winking ptosis.
Marcus-Gunn-Joe-Winking ptosis. Okay. So when he is like, eating or drinking or clenching the teeth, you can see the eyelid is going up. So even in a baby in your clinic, not only an adult, this is very, very important, especially when you know it's a congenital ptosis. It's so very important to rule out Marcus-Gunn-Joe-Winking phenomenon. You can tell the mother to, feed the baby with milk or biscuits, and then look for these things, because it's very important for decision making. So if it is a Marcus-Gunn-Joe-Winking phenomenon, you don't jump for the management in children, because you know that the chances of amblyopia is very, very less, because it's going to, they just adjust, they put their jaw in position and they kind of adjust. So you don't have to jump for the surgical management in these children. So this is a very complex congenital ptosis. All right. The child has bilateral ptosis. So there is Marcus-Gunn-Joe-Winking in one eye, and then other eye go for ptosis when it is. So it's basically a mix of syndromic association. And also he has got, what is this?
Right eye Brown syndrome.
Well, it's not Brown syndrome. In fact, the elevation deficiency. Okay. So we always talk about monoocular elevation deficiency. This child, since it was a totally complex ptosis, he has a bilateral elevation deficiency also. So the ocular motility in these children is also very, very important. Now, management of blepharoptosis in children, yes, the risk of amblyopia is there. That's how you take a decision whether you want to manage the case or observe the case. Then comes the functional deformity, the vision, and the cosmetic concern. So functional deformity, again, in adults is very, very important. It's not only cosmetic in most of the cases. So this is a patient who has undergone a cataract surgery. All right. Yeah. And you can see that it's covering the pupillary area. And especially when they do down gaze work, when they are climbing down the stairs, when they are reading, the palpebral fissure height on down gaze is very, very narrow in an acquired aponeurotic ptosis. Okay, and this in fact affects the quality of life of these patients. So you just cannot do the cataract and leave these patients alone. If at all there is even, acquired aponeurotic ptosis, even the ptosis has to be addressed. And finally, yes, cosmetic concern is quite important in these patients also. So he in fact underwent a blepharoplasty and an LPS resection. So after that, he was very, very happy. Despite having a cataract surgery, he was still not seeing well. He's seeing well now, and he also feels that he has become more younger than how he was earlier. So it is an addition of function as well as cosmesis in this patient. So ptosis, well, I'm sure you're all very good. When Aparna and Detti was discussing, I know the quality of postgraduate students there in Kerala. So the history is so very important: age of onset, mode of onset, laterality, diurnal variation is again very, very important, especially when it is an older patient. Progression, history of trauma, history of any prior surgery, medications, periocular and systemic symptoms has to be asked for. Family history is very, very, very important. Never miss that in your history. Okay. So this is a mother who has undergone a ptosis surgery. You can see multiple surgeries done, a frontalis sling has been done, and the child also presenting with the same. So eyelid evaluation for ptosis, apart from the eyelid evaluation, most importantly, you have to look for the facial symmetry, the head posture, the frontalis overaction also. Now, ptosis measurement, this is the list that I would give all the postgraduate students. You know, there are 10 things which is very, very important, which has to come in your paper during your practical examination, or even in your clinical evaluation of a ptosis patient, starting from palpebral fissure height, in primary gaze and down gaze, because in a congenital ptosis, it is more, whereas in an acquired ptosis, it will be less. All right. Margin reflex distance, 1 is the only important thing. You don't have to talk about MRD2 or MRD3 in ptosis evaluation. Lid crease distance, LPS action, tarsal height after averting the eyelid, Marcus gun jaw winking phenomenon, Bell's phenomenon. And then you have the ocular motility, which is very, very, very important, and frontalis overaction and phenylephrine test if it is required. So these are the things that you have to look for evaluation of ptosis for your exam. Okay. So now degree of ptosis, again, the Beard's method is comparing the border, the upper lid margin to the pupillary reflex. So depending upon where it is classified into mild, moderate, and severe. Now there is again a classification of LPS action. You should be putting that down in your paper as well. When it's less than 4 millimeters, it's poor, and anything more than 10 millimeters is considered to be excellent. So now DETI, this is a case. Okay, what do you see? Give me a good diagnosis over here.
Mild right eye ptosis.
Mild right eye ptosis, acquired or congenital? You should have asked, no, history. It's acquired. It was not there as a child. That's what she says. That's it. Over. Anything else? Anyone from the audience can add.
Right eye Horner
Meiosis. Yes.
Horner
Yes.
syndrome.
Yes, Roshna. She has a meiosis. Okay, you see the pupil. So pupillary examination is also very, very important in these cases. So the answer is Roshna, Horner syndrome. Okay, so this is a case of an Horner syndrome. So anterior segment evaluation, never forget, whether it is an eyelid case and an orbit case, it's so very important. So this is a case of a very mild ptosis, unilateral ptosis with a meiosis, and the case is a Horner syndrome. Okay, perfect. So rule number 1 in any ptosis evaluation is you have to always rule out pseudotosis. Best corrected visual acuity is very, very important because you want to rule out amblyopia. And ptosis correction is not the end of the management. You have to always do the amblyopia therapy further. So it's very important. And of course, never forget ocular motility in these patients. So in fact, this patient was a very young patient who came to me, all right, and he doesn't have an lid crease. Absent lid crease means what?
Congenital ptosis.
Congenital ptosis. Okay, so he was trying to convince me that, you know, this was not there when I was born. It is an acquired thing, and I just couldn't believe it because it's very severe ptosis. There is absence of lid crease, and then I had written it down as congenital ptosis, although the patient was repeatedly telling me that it was not there, it has been, you know, acquired. So this is so very important as a clinician to get the pictures of these patients, you know, ask the patients for previous pictures. So in fact, the patient was right and I was wrong. All right. He didn't have the ptosis as a child. It gradually developed during his lifetime. But when he presented with an absent lid crease, well, I thought it's a congenital ptosis, which probably he would have missed. So this is also very important in your management to, reach an accurate decision. Comparing the previous photographs of the patient. We always do this. If the patient doesn't come with it, we ask them to send it to us, or in the next evaluation, bring all the photos. So this is in fact an acquired ptosis, which was appearing like a congenital ptosis with absent lid crease. All right. Yeah. So similar, another patient, all right, 20-year-old male with progressive droopy eyelid, similar like the other patient. He also says it was not there when I was born. It has been progressively causing droopiness. And you can see bilateral ptosis over here, right? Ocular position, is it normal?
No, not normal.
Not normal. So a 20-year-old male with progressive droopy eyelid, he said like this has been happening for the past 2 years. Like, 17, 18 years of age, it started. I can give you a clue.
Chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia.
Excellent, Roshna. Yes. So this is a chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia, very classical presentation. Okay. Blepharoptosis, limited ocular motility. And this is what, Roshna?
Ragged fibers.
Ragged fibers. Okay. So this is a case of a chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia. A 68-year-old lady with progressive droopy eyelid and diplopia.
Myasthenia gravis.
Myasthenia gravis.
Myasthenia gravis. Perfect. All right. Blepharoptosis, limited ocular motility. Okay. And what are the tests that you would do quickly?
Neostigmine test.
Ice pack test.
Ice pack. Clinically, ice pack.
Pencil-on test.
Pencil-on test. Anything else?
Cogan slip stitch, fatigability.
Nerve stimulation.
Whenever you talk to an examiner, everyone is giving me random answers. Again, think, be organized. Clinical tests, okay. Blood investigations, other diagnostic modalities. This is exactly how you have to go through. So clinical test, you gave me all random things. Everything is right. Blood tests.
Receptor antibodies.
Antibodies.
Yeah. Then?
Striational antibody, anti-mask.
Anti-mask, yeah, Shabiba, correct. Okay, so these are the things that you should be knowing. What are the other diagnostic modalities, quick? Which is the most sensitive test?
Single nerve fiber EMG.
Perfect. Okay, you all know it. So I'm not going into this detail. This is a patient again who presented with ptosis, who was referred to me as a case of ptosis. There is a ptosis, no? Which eye?
Right.
Right eye. So acquired, do we put it as acquired ptosis of unilateral right eye? Anything abnormal?
There's a lateral flare in the left eye.
Left eye, lateral flare. Okay, so you think it is a thyroid? Dr. Elsa?
Yes, I am. There is a possibility.
Possibility. So Dr. Elsa thinks there is a possibility of thyroid eye disease. So whenever you have a ptosis with thyroid eye disease, what is the diagnosis?
Myasthenia gravis.
You should rule out myasthenia gravis. Well, this is not myasthenia gravis. What else can you see compared to the other eye?
Mueller's muscle overaction.
Mueller's
Sympathetic overaction.
Overactive.
No.
He has eyelid retraction, Aparna. She has a ptosis.
Yes.
You know what this was? This was a T-cell lymphoma. You see this periocular fullness over here? All right. It's not a very straightforward ptosis. Why should ptosis have this abnormal fullness in the upper eyelid over here in the periocular area? You have to compare the other areas. So a periocular area evaluation is also very, very important. In fact, she had a mass which was lying here. in the supromedial aspect of the orbit. I have the imaging over here. And this came out to be a T-cell lymphoma in this patient who was presenting and referred as a case of ptosis. And this is after chemotherapy. So these are the things that you have to keep in mind. Now, surgical management of blepharoptosis, I'm not going into detail. You can all read it up. It basically depends upon the type, the severity, the LPS action, and the Bell's phenomenon, okay? And also whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. Depending upon that, that's how you take up the patient for surgery. I'm not going into the detail of this at all. Now, well, what deformity is this eyelid?
Coloboma of the upper lid.
Coloboma of the upper lid. The child, in fact, had a choristoma also in the conjunctiva all along over here. And well, you know, a procedure of Tenzel's flap was done. So this is again a case of coloboma of the eyelid. Why I have put this case here is, again, you might get cases of eyelid deformity such as coloboma, you know, a Goldenhar syndrome, or any choristomas happening. And I just wanted to highlight it over here. Another thing that I really wanted to highlight over here for you as a practical purpose, you know, managing emergencies, is that how do you reconstruct eyelid? Just a very small gist of it, just because I'm doing oculoplasty class over here, you initially look whether the posterior lamella is involved or the anterior lamella is involved. If the tarsus is involved, well, you know, then you have to reconstruct the full thickness of the eyelid. If it is not involved, then you only do the anterior lamella reconstruction, which can be a small lesion, can be, I mean, a small defect can be secondary intention healing, direct closure. Depending upon the severity of the defect, you can even go for skin graft, skin flap, or even a cutomarginal graft. Now, depending upon how much there is a defect in the eyelid, that is how you decide what kind of flaps and what kind of techniques that you have to use. Anything which is more than 50% is significant, then you have to look for any residual tarsus. And if there is, there is no residual tarsus present, then obviously you have to give the posterior lamella and the anterior lamella, and the different techniques are the occlusive techniques and the non-occlusive techniques. Occlusive techniques, what are the occlusive techniques that you know in eyelid reconstruction? Yeah, anyone?
Hughes procedure.
Hughes procedure, yes. Anything else?
Hughes, Cutler-Beard, and
Cutler-Beard and Hughes. Okay, yeah. So usually we say in children we avoid these occlusive procedures because there is a chance of amblyopia. And non-occlusive techniques are tarsoconjunctival graft or tarsoconjunctival substitute and all these sandwich flaps. Okay, so this is something that you should know. Quickly going on to the lacrimal system. This is all that I assimilated and wanted to talk about eyelid. So lacrimal system, basically you need to know about the lacrimal drainage system. These are all quiz questions which all of you should know. If you get a case of dacryocystitis, sometimes the examiners might ask you all these things about valve of Rosenmuller, all these fancy names. I'm not going into detail of that. All right. Now, whenever a patient presents with a watering, be it in a clinic or for your exam, you should always rule out hyposecretion, all the causes of hyposecretion like blepharitis, dry eye, keratitis, and corneal foreign body. And then comes the epiphora part. All right. I'm sorry. I should, 1 second. All right. Yeah, I'm really sorry. I mean, I didn't do the animation over here. So, well, this was a patient who presented with epiphora, and this is how his canthus looks like. Anyone? Answer?
Centurion syndrome.
Centurion syndrome. So what is Centurion syndrome?
Displacement of the puncta.
So basically there is the anterior placement of the medial canthal tendon, okay, which causes this parrot beak appearance and causes epiphora. So you can see the puncti will not be opposed to the lacus lacrimalis. There is a gap between the puncta and the globe and the lacus lacrimalis, and that's why these patients present with epiphora. Yes, so this is a case of a Centurion syndrome. Now, before even you go and diagnose a lacrimal issue, lacrimal pump failure issue, or a dacryocystitis, you should always evaluate the ocular surface. And something which is always missed in a clinic, which I really want to point out here, is the meibomian gland disorder. Most of these patients will have mild to moderate to severe meibomian gland disorder, which is actually the cause of lot of watering that they have. So evaluate the ocular surface and rule out hypersecretion in these cases. Now, about lacrimal system diseases, well, as you all know, the age of onset, duration of symptoms, everything is very, very important. You have to look for history of trauma. If it is a childhood disorder, then it's a congenital nasolacrimal duct disorder. Otherwise, it's acquired. It can be acute dacryocystitis, as in this case. It can be an abscess, depending upon the severity. So what is this diagnosis in this child over here?
Amniotocele.
Perfect. So can amniotocele be an emergency?
If it is infected secondarily.
Okay. Anything else?
Amniotic fluid embolism.
No. Okay, they can have respiratory distress syndrome. Okay. Yeah, especially when it is a bilateral amniotocele. Yeah, there is obstruction of respiration in these children, and it is an emergency in these children. I am sure all of you know how a good syringing is done. All right, yeah. So it's very important to know whether, first thing what we look for when we put a syringe inside is whether it's in hard stop or a soft stop. All right. So how soft stop means what?
There is some membrane.
Okay, means what? What is the diagnosis if you go with a syringe and then you have a soft stop? These are very basic questions.
Hard stop is normal, and soft stop means there is some obstruction.
Some obstruction means?
Membrane is obstruction.
Common canalicular obstruction.
Common canalicular obstruction. You see here, yeah, if there is a common canalicular obstruction, you can be very, very specific. Okay, that's when you get a soft stop. In fact, how we do a syringing is like we just don't put the syringe in the canaliculi. We go inside, we get a hard stop, and then we slightly bring it up. In fact, the syringe will be somewhere over here. And that is how we do a syringing. That is how a good syringing is done. All right, yeah. So that is very in short about lacrimal system. Any questions in lacrimal system you can ask me. I don't think you will get an acute dacryocystitis case. Probably you might get a chronic dacryocystitis case. All right. Any questions? Or we'll take questions finally. Okay, now we're going on to orbit. And now, again, as we discussed, the eyelid orbit is again an examination case for you. Most of the time, you can get a proptosis. So anatomy of the orbit, knowing the anatomy of the orbit is very, very important. Okay, so I'm sure you all know the walls of the orbit, etc., etc. Orbital apex anatomy is very important. It can be a theoretical question for you. There can be many, many questions which is asked from the orbital apex anatomy, not going into the detail again. All right. Now, orbital disorders, from the symptoms, duration, and signs, you can always clinically assess whether it is infective, inflammatory, or neoplastic. How does an infective orbital disorder present? So Aparna, and we can have someone else for the orbit. You did an excellent job. You're very, very good in your subject. Roshna, do you want to take for orbit?
Yes. Okay, madam. Yes, madam.
Okay. Anyone else? Any volunteer? Orbit? Apart from Roshna? No one? Pin drop silence.
Ashwini?
Dr. Elsa was answering well.
Yes, madam.
Okay, so will you be a volunteer, Elsa?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we have Roshna and Dr. Elsa here. Yeah, so Roshna, tell me, how would you differentiate between an infective, inflammatory, and neoplastic orbital disorders?
Infective will be associated fever. Pain will be there. And
how is the onset? That is very important, no? When a patient presents with an orbital disorder. Onset is the first thing that all these things, yes, I agree, Roshna, absolutely. What would you want to say in infective and infective?
Infect will be acute onset.
Acute onset, yeah. Any orbital presenting with an acute onset, it can be either infective or inflammatory also, right? Inflammatory can also be chronic. But neoplasm is usually
more chronic.
Yeah, okay. So it's a progressive orbital disorder, basically. It doesn't present as an acute onset. So all these things are very, very important. Taking a very good history in orbit is so important. Looking at the duration and then also the signs. Now, these are the P's of orbital disorder. As a postgraduate student, again, this is how I have read and I have been taught. Usually we talk about the 6 P's, but well, I would also add a 7P to it, the periorbital signs in orbit. All right, yeah. So a presentation, as we already mentioned, if it's acute, it can be infection, inflammation, long-standing neoplasm, or even granulomas. Now, pain is, as Roshna has already mentioned, pain is very, very characteristic of inflammatory and infective. And even in advanced neoplasm, if it's a very bad malignancy, if there is necrosis of that tumor, they can present with the pain as well. Now, proptosis is the most common symptom of any orbital disease. It is basically indicates that the lesion is space occupying, and depending upon the location of the lesion, be it neoplasia, inflammation, or an abscess, in acute infection, whatever, that will show the direction of the proptosis. It can be an axial proptosis or it can be an abaxial proptosis. Then comes the progression. If it is slow, it's usually a benign neoplasm. If it is rapid, it can be infection or malignant neoplasm. Palpation is very, very important. You all know about that, palpation and pulsation. It can be direct or transmitted. So what are the lesions that causes direct pulsation, Roshna?
Direct pulsation from the cardiocavernous fistula and transmitted from the orbital
encephalocele
and from the brain.
Transmitted from the brain. Transmitted, not transmitted from the orbit. Something which is transmitted from the brain to the orbit, right? Yeah. Yeah. Keratoconus fistula. Anything else? Any AV fistulas. Okay, any AV fistulas. It doesn't have to be specifically keratoconus. And then periorbital symptoms. Periorbital symptoms, they can present with edema, they can present with hyperemia. You have to look at the color, you have to look at the consistency. All right, yeah. When I talk about the color, if a patient presents with a proptosis, I have not put a picture over here. Let me see whether you can answer this. If they have a yellow discoloration over the periocular area with proptosis, what would you think of? No pain. A yellow discoloration over the periocular area with proptosis, fullness. Roshna, your mic is off. You're mute. Dr. Elsa?
Madam, may I ask, is the sensation normal?
Sensation is normal. Why did you ask me that?
Before necrotizing fasciitis, usually the color of the skin may be slightly yellowish or leathery kind of the skin appearance would be there. No, the eye might be quiet with proptosis.
Correct, Elsa, but there is no pain in necrotizing fasciitis. There will be
xanthogranulomatosis, madam.
Yes, xanthogranuloma. Okay, xanthogranuloma. I should have kept a picture. I didn't. Yeah, xanthogranuloma. So color is very, very important. Even, a reddish appearance, if there is any vascular lesion, if there is a varix or any AV malformation, all these things are very important. So I would say that there are 7 P's in the evaluation of orbital case. Now, clinical evaluation of a case of the orbit, these are the things, list of things, as I gave you a list in ptosis, these are the list of things that we would look for. Best corrected visual acuity is very important. Color vision is extremely important. Any orbital case, be it an inflammatory disease, infective or a neoplastic disease, pupillary reaction, very important, which tells you whether there is any optic neuropathy associated with it. Lid signs are important, especially when it is a thyroid case. And most of the time in your exam, you'll end up getting a thyroid case. Ocular position, resistance on retropulsion is very, very important. We just keep the finger on the eyeball and look for, this retropulsion of the eyeball. So if there is any space occupying lesion, there will be resistance. If there is any soft vascular lesion, the resistance may not be present. So these are the important thing: pulsation, tenderness, any mass which is palpable, extraocular motility, of course. We call it limitation initially, and after doing an FDT, you will come to know whether it is a paralytic or a restrictive component. So never say restrictive myopathy initially in your exam. You always say limitation. Only if you have done FDT, then only you can say whether it is restrictive or paralytic. Assessment of diplopia is very important. Diplopia charting, I'm sure all of you know it. Anterior segment evaluation and fundus evaluation, especially to rule out optic neuropathy in proptosis. So there are orbital emergencies, and mostly you will not get orbital emergencies in your exam. But of course, you might land up seeing these cases in your emergency as a duty doctor or a practicing clinician. Infection, inflammation, trauma, and vascular disease. Systemic evaluation is very important. Also, lymph node examination is very, very important in the orbit, because certain inflammation and granulomas can present with lymph nodes, be it tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, or any other Rosai-Dorfman, very, very rare disorders can present with lymph nodes. Now, there is a difference between proptosis and dystopia. Proptosis is basically, the eyeball which is protruding outside. You have, again, proptosis can be what, Roshna? How do you classify proptosis? This is what proptosis.
Axial proptosis.
Axial proptosis and abaxial proptosis, okay, or dystopia. Okay, so dystopia depends upon where the lesion is. Sorry. All right. And you all know how to measure proptosis and dystopia? Exophthalmometry, I'm sure. Yes.
Yes,
yeah, Hertels is, yeah. What exophthalmometry do you have in your hospital, Roshna?
Hertels, madam.
Hertels, yeah. Hertels is the best. Perfect. Okay, and dystopia, this is how you measure the dystopia. In relation to the corneal reflex of the opposite side, you might need 2 scales, whether it's inferior dystopia, depending upon the location of the lesion. Now, this is a case where the patient presented with an acute onset of swelling and progressive proptosis. There was associated pain, blurring of vision, and it was non-responsive to antibiotics. Who wants to give me the answer? Everything is here. Just one answer if it comes to the clinic. Is it infective, inflammatory, or neoplastic? Quick. We're almost getting done for the day.
Inflammatory.
Inflammatory. Okay.
Yeah,
yeah, from this picture, well, it could be infective or inflammatory. Okay, acute onset of swelling, and it is progressing. But from the image,
ethmoidal mucocele.
Ethmoidal mucocele will present with pain, Roshna?
No, madam.
Then ruled out.
Pseudotumor, madam.
So this, well, pseudotumor is definitely a differential diagnosis, provisional diagnosis clinically. I've given you an image also here. So in orbit, imaging is so very important, right? Half of the diagnosis is from the imaging. Okay, at least tell me what cut this is.
Coronal heads.
And this is? What cut is this?
Sagittal.
Sagittal cut. Yeah. What do you see? Tell me, what are you seeing? You just explain what you're seeing and I'll give you the diagnosis if you can't diagnose. Which orbit is affected? Obviously left orbit, right? What are you seeing here? The eyeball is pushed down. What is pushing the eyeball?
Mass from supranasal area.
Mass in the supranasal area. Okay. So what do you think the density of the mass is if you're calling it as a mass? This is vitreous. This is vitreous inside the eye, right?
Yes.
Almost the same.
Fluid containing.
Fluid, correct. Okay, so there is some fluid kind of consistency there. And what is this line over here? Will a mass have such kind of a very well-defined lining there? No, right?
Cystic swelling.
Cystic swelling.
Okay. Neurocysticercosis, yes, is usually cystic. You'll have a well-defined cyst. Is this well-defined? Superior edge, not really seen. No, you'll actually find a cyst there in neurocysticercosis. Not neurocysticercosis, in cysticercosis of the orbit. So anything else? Well, yes, that is a differential diagnosis. So, you know, there is some fluid collection. It is acute onset. It is painful. So this lining, what you see here is the periorbita. Perfect. So there is something which is inside the periorbita, right? So can you have abscess in orbital cellulitis, infective orbital cellulitis?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So this is actually a periorbital abscess. Where the patient presented with orbital cellulitis, he was not imaged. He was just put on antibiotics. So any patient presenting with an orbital cellulitis, it's mandatory to do an imaging. If an imaging was not done, you would have never found out this, right? So this is a case of a periorbital abscess presenting with orbital cellulitis. And we just did a drainage and he was absolutely fine. Now this is a middle-aged gentleman again. Which eye? Proptosis? Very obvious.
Right eye.
Right eye. What kind of proptosis?
Axial proptosis.
Axial proptosis. Okay, so his vision is 6/60. What could be the cause? In an axial proptosis patient, when the vision drops down to 6/60, as an orbital surgeon, it is a big concern for us. And what do you suspect?
Optic nerve sheath meningioma.
Optic nerve sheath meningioma, okay. Basically, some problem is there with the optic nerve, right? Yeah, optic nerve sheath meningioma. Anything else? Optic nerve compression, right?
Yes.
Optic nerve compression. All right, yeah. So basically, yeah, this is what he had. He had a large lesion sitting in the intraconal space. So in neoplasms, whenever the patient, you're suspecting a neoplasm, he never had pain, it was a gradual progression of the proptosis. Anything which is sitting in the intraconal space will cause an axial proptosis. And in fact, he was having optic nerve compression leading to reduction in the vision, and this was a large tumor which was taken out. Okay. Now, so orbital imaging is very, very important in any of the orbital disease. Orbital imaging itself is a big session, but I'm not going into the details. So very important to send the clinical history, the clinical findings and provisional diagnosis to the radiologist. And then there is no point complaining that you didn't get a good report back. So they also have to correlate the case. So these are the checklists that we usually send for orbital imaging. The slice thickness usually preferred is 1.25 millimeters to 2 millimeters. And image plane, we ask for all the image plane, the axial, coronal, and sagittal. So in the request to the radiologist, we actually put these things down. And most of the time, whether it's if it's an infection, obviously you may not need a contrast enhancement, but if it's an inflammation, if it's a neoplasia, often we need a contrast enhancement, and especially if you're clinically suspecting a vascular lesion in the orbit. If at all you need any modification, if you want to know the Hounsfield unit, there are so many things. You ask for it. Simultaneous brain imaging, if you want, you take it. Vascular lesions, you go for angiography or even MR venography. And special techniques like 3D reconstruction is done in trauma. All right, so I'll just quickly show this. We are coming to the end of today's session. So basically, whenever there is an intraconal, the intra-axial proptosis, these are the things that you have to keep in mind as far as neoplasia is concerned, like avanusem angioma, optic nerve glioma, meningioma, schwannoma. These are the intraconal lesions. Extraconal lesions are, the list is here. I'm not, again, going to name out each one of them. And certain things like lymphangioma, Varix lymphoma, neurofibroma, and sarcoma, it can present in both intraconal as well as extraconal compartment. It's a very interesting case. A 65-year-old lady who presented with diplopia and discomfort in the right eye. Who wants to take this?
Yes, yes, madam.
Roshna, you want to take it? Or Elsa, who's taking it? Quickly, we don't have time.
Yes, yes, madam.
1 minute. What you want to describe the case?
Madam, this patient has a shallow socket and grooves, upper eyelid grooving. The sulcus is very deep.
Which eye are you talking about? Both
the
eyes?
left eye.
Okay.
Both eyes. Both eyes.
Okay.
The diplopia could be due to the sagging eye syndrome.
You're landing up in trouble. The more you speak, you land up in trouble in your exam. Sagging eye syndrome and all. Do you want to say that even here, Roshna? Is this a sagging eye syndrome? Your examiner will ask you what is sagging eye syndrome then.
There is a defect in the lateral wall of right.
Tell me the clinical finding. Quick clinical finding, and then we'll go to the imaging.
Clinical finding,
which eye is affected over here? You have a correlation also. Which eye is affected?
Right eye is.
Right eye is affected. Is there a proptosis?
Mild proptosis.
Mild proptosis. Is there a dystopia?
Yes.
There is a dystopia. Where is the dystopia?
The right eye.
Right where? Superiorly. The eyeball is pushed superior, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So there is a dystopia. With superior displacement of the eyeball. Right? And which is correlating with the imaging over here, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And this is the MRI correlation. All right.
Yes,
so this is how she presented.
Yes.
And she has an eyelid. Inferior scleral show is more, isn't it? One is because there is a dystopia. So there is some lesion in the extraconal compartment over here. And you can see the lesion here, right? There is absolutely no pain. What are the things that you would keep in mind?
Lymphoma, madam.
Lymphoma, yes, absolutely. I thought the same. Why would you think of lymphoma?
It molds around the globe, madam.
Absolutely. Excellent, Shabiba. Yeah. Even I thought initially, this was a case of lymphoma. Yeah. In fact, yeah. It's involving the inferior rectus. That is why she has a diplopia. There is motility restriction in this case. Differential diagnosis, 1 lymphoma. Anything else? Granuloma?
Parasitic granuloma.
Parasitic granuloma, yes. You can even think of fungal granuloma. Okay, fungal granuloma, they usually don't have a pain. Aspergilloma will not have pain. I'm not talking about mucor over here. Aspergilloma, yeah. Granulomas, yeah. Okay, so the diagnosis quickly came in after an anterior segment evaluation, in fact. Now you can give me the diagnosis. What do you see in the conjunctiva?
Cysts in conjunctiva.
Cyst in the conjunctiva. Whoever gives me the diagnosis definitely is getting a prize today. If there is any consultants here, please do it.
Echinococcus.
Echinococcus granulosus. No. Why do you say so? You have to teach me now. What do you see in the conjunctiva? Can you see something?
Corkscrew.
Corkscrew vessels, huh? What is this? You don't see anything?
Cyst-like elevation.
So what is it? Multiple cystic syndrome of orbit? Huh? Anyone, quickly.
Salmon patch.
Salmon patch. എന്താണ് ഇഷ്ട?
Dirophilaria.
Dirophilaria, not really. Dirophilaria, initially, there can be inflammation, no? Or maybe not, yeah. No, it's not dirophilaria, no. Shall I go ahead? You're missing a prize. Pass, all of you?
Sarcoid.
Who is that? Who said that? Milu Mohandas?
Yes, ma'am, sarcoid.
Congratulations. Milu, you are getting a prize from me, okay? Yeah, so basically this is a case of sarcoidosis. So sarcoidosis, whenever you find a, granulomatous kind of an clinical lesion, always evaluate. Otherwise, also evaluate the anterior segment. So an orbital lesion can be diagnosed with an anterior segment evaluation. She doesn't even require an orbital biopsy here. The only thing which is required here is to take the biopsy of this conjunctival granuloma over here. And it is a case of sarcoidosis. Milu, you're messaging me your address, okay? Excellent.
Okay, ma'am.
All right, yeah. So, well, now quickly on thyroid. Nirmal, do I have 3 minutes?
Yeah, sure, madam. You have 5 minutes, 10 minutes. That is fine. No
okay,
issue.
Fine. All right.
We have still 66 people are waiting to hear you. You need not rush if you are okay with it. Madam.
I am absolutely okay.
Please do continue.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, so Milu is getting a prize for sarcoidosis. Now, just quickly going to thyroid, I've already done a thyroid session with Kozhikode Ophthalmological Society before. Why I'm doing it is because this is your exam case. So this is how classically a thyroid case presents with bilateral proptosis. It could be asymmetric. It can also be unilateral proptosis and a very classical lateral flare and eyelid retraction, okay? They can also present with severe inflammatory symptoms like this due to the exposure and also periorbital inflammation, as you can see here. And the important thing to differentiate an orbital neoplastic disease or a granulomatous disease from a thyroid, it is a lid signs. So you should be knowing about all the lid signs of the thyroid. This is an article that has been published in KJO. I would like all of you postgraduates to go and read it because everything testing on thyroid is there. So, I'm not going into the details of it much. Why is it so important? Because it's the most common disease affecting the orbit, and it's the most common cause of proptosis, which can come for your examination. And high risk groups are cigarette smokers, diabetics, elderly males. Autoimmune is the pathophysiology. So now this is something that I want all of you to understand over here, because understanding this will help you to know why the clinical signs and symptoms happen. So basically, thyroid affects the muscles and the adipose tissue. So it's basically due to the enlargement of the muscles and the enlargement of the fat tissue that the proptosis happens. Then they will be having severe ocular surface congestion, periocular swelling, and eyelid retraction due to many reasons. Even sympathetic overactivity is also one of the reasons causing the eyelid retraction. Now, this is the active phase. Then you have the chronic phase, the inactive phase. Again, in that, they will retain to have the eyelid retraction. They will retain to have some amount of proptosis, because whatever inflammatory orbital fat tissue is, it's still there enlarged. So the proptosis never goes back in thyroid eye disease, although the inflammation settles down. And once there is fibrosis of the muscle, these patients have ocular motility restriction, myopathy, and then they can have fibrosis, scarring, and causing diplopia in these patients. So overall, this is the classification system that all of you should be knowing. Examiners will ask you right from the oldest classification to the newer classification. So this classification is based on the CT scan, the type 1, type 2, and type 3, depending upon the muscular involvement, the fat involvement, and both muscle and fat involvement. Okay. Now, this is the most important scoring system that we use in thyroid eye disease, and that is called the Moritz score, or the clinical activity score. And it is 10 in number. It's not difficult to remember. Depending upon the number of signs are there, this is how you classify whether it's an active disease or an inactive disease. Anything more than 3 is active, and anything less than 3 is inactive. Another thing that you should know is the Rundle's curve, because thyroid eye disease has a natural course. It starts with a dynamic phase where the inflammation is peaking, then it comes down into a static phase, and finally it settles down in 18 months to 2 years. So activity is usually in the dynamic phase and the peak phase, and usually in the static phase, it's usually inactive in thyroid eye disease. There are so many things that you need to understand. There is a lot of research going on, a lot of newer therapies which is coming up on thyroid eye disease. It can also come as an essay for you, the newer therapeutics of thyroid eye disease. These are the things that you should know. How do you investigate? Imaging plays a major role in order to evaluate whether there is orbitopathy, myopathy, and even optic neuropathy, where the muscles are compressing on the optic nerve, and the thyroid function test. These are the list of thyroid function tests that we order in thyroid eye disease. All right. Now, the cause of reduction in vision and optic neuropathy in thyroid eye disease, there are 2 things. One is the muscles which is compressing, the enlarged muscles compressing the optic nerve, and even the proptosis can cause a stretch neuropathy and cause a reduction in vision. Now, you have to differentiate between myositis and thyroid eye disease, because both affects the muscle. And you all know the classical appearance, the Coca-Cola bottle appearance, where the tendons are spared and it's only the belly which is enlarged, whereas in myositis, the entire muscle is involved. Compressive optic neuropathy is something that you should always rule out, and this is why it happens. The large enlarged inferior rectus muscle, medial rectus muscle, which is compressing the optic nerve in thyroid. Now, treatment, I'm not going into the detail. Depending upon whether it's active and inactive, that's how we treat. Active disease has to be treated because it can lead to so many complications. Even the sequelae can lead to so much of an issue due to fibrosis of the orbital tissue. And inactive disease is usually surgery. So this is an inactive case, and this is when we go for surgical management. And most of the cases that you get for your exam will be an inactive case. A painful case will not be kept for your exam. So this is a patient with pediatric orbital thyroid eye disease who grew up in his later teens. and then he has this proptosis and orbital decompression was done for him. That's all which is required. Now, when it is, of all TED patients, restoring the euthyroid status is very important. Smoking cessation is very, very important, and general conservative measure. Mild thyroid eye disease, it is symptomatic treatment, and sometimes we might give oral corticosteroids if at all it is required. Otherwise, it's totally systemic treatment. Selenium is something that you have to read about, although there has been a paper, but it's usually not used much in clinical practice because of the controversy in the paper. Moderate to severe TED, intravenous corticosteroids is the treatment of choice, and it is methylprednisolone that we usually give. You have to know about the cumulative dose. It should never exceed 8 grams, and it's given in a pulse therapy. So in an active disease, IVMP is the treatment of choice, and these are the steroid-sparing immunosuppressive drugs which is used in thyroid eye disease. This is the newer advance in the treatment of thyroid eye disease, which is teprotumumab. It's otherwise called Tepezza. You might get a short note, or even the examiner might ask you on this. Now, surgical intervention is usually done in an active phase, but also in active phase, if there is acute compressive optic neuropathy, then we go for orbital decompression. Well, thank you, and that's the end of today's session. I just quickly wrapped up the final phase, and I'm sure they all know about thyroid eye disease, so kept it for the last as well.
Actually, madam, you had given a talk on thyroid ophthalmopathy, and
I did, yeah, yes, yeah.
And the journal is also very good. Please go through that article.
Yeah.
Shall I give you a spotter, Cyrus, madam?
Yes, please.
No, this is just a memory from my postgraduate days.
Yeah, please discuss.
This was probably the biggest proptosis that I had seen. Yeah, you will get a prize. I will give you very few clues.
Okay, fine.
Okay. 27-year-old lady, gradually progressive painless proptosis with dystopia.
27-year-old?
Yeah. Over the last 6 years. No other, I don't have the imaging, nothing like that. Okay, madam.
Okay,
I'm so sorry.
without imaging, I have to diagnose. 27-year-old. Is there any pulsation, bruit?
No, nothing like that.
No pulsation or
no
bruit?
pulsation, no bruit.
Okay, no pain at all, right?
No pain, nothing.
Okay, rapidly progressing or slow progressive?
No, slow progressing. Over the last probably 7 or 8 years, this was progressing.
Okay, yeah.
This patient is from Odisha. I did my PG from Odisha.
Okay.
Her husband left her because of the proptosis.
Okay, all right. And vision?
Vision was unaffected actually.
Okay.
Around 612 in right eye, 66 in left eye. There were some choroidal folds.
Okay.
Not much of disc edema.
Okay. So, well, I would consider it as a neoplasia because there is no pain associated with proptosis. Okay. And also a benign neoplasia because it has been very slowly progressive. Okay. So in a female presenting at this age, there are certain differential diagnoses that I would consider. First and foremost, solitary fibrous tumor is something that I would consider because it usually grows large and it can cause severe proptosis like this. And I hope it's not soft. The consistency, I forgot.
It was soft, madam. It was soft.
It is soft?
Yeah, it is soft.
Okay. Then I would also consider venolymphatic malformation in this case, if it is a soft inconsistency. Yes. And
to our surprise, it was a capillary hemangioma.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Meaning at that time I had very little knowledge, but I was so curious about this patient.
It's a very large capillary hemangioma. Usually grows very slowly.
Okay, yeah.
Very, very slowly, yeah. So capillary hemangioma, of course, you get vascular lesions. Sometimes when we talk about solitary fibrous tumor has two spectrum. One is hemangiopericytoma, and the other one is a fibrous spectrum. So if you don't do immunohistochemistry, sometimes you can actually mistake hemangiopericytoma as capillary hemangioma.
Okay.
Right?
This
yeah.
is the biopsy report that we had. That's it.
Immunohistochemistry is so important because capillary hemangioma doesn't grow this big at 27 years of age, Yeah, causing a dystopia. Most commonly, it is in the intraconal compartment. Usually, it's an axial proptosis.
This was like mixed. It was something was like intraconal, something was like extraconal. The imaging came brought a picture like that. It was not very ill-defined, kind of.
I would still consider hemangiopericytoma, the component of SFT, as the first differential diagnosis, and then
Madam.
yeah.
Her surgery, I think we had to take it up in piecemeal and all. I think our chief madam did it, but this was the result.
Nice.
This was the result post-op.
Excellent result. Excellent result.
I don't know if her husband came back. By that time, I had come back.
Wonderful. What a wonderful surgery. And vision retained 6/6.
Yeah, vision retained.
Super. Did you assess this surgery, Nirmal?
I just saw it.
Oh, excellent.
There were so many people to assist it. We were juniors.
Oh, nice. Excellent.
Okay, over to Vijalish madam. You want to
PGs, any more doubts or anything to be asked?
And Milu, you have to message me, okay? Nirmal will have my phone number. I'll send you the price. Yeah.
Milu, can you come up with the video if it is okay?
Can I see your face?
Yeah.
Milu's having dinner.
Milu's having dinner.
I know Milu. Milu, you were in that PG competition, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Ah, I know you. Yes, okay. Did you win the competition that day?
No, ma'am.
Okay, it's okay. You won today. All right.
Okay, congrats, Milu.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, PGs, if you have any chat box also, I don't see any questions. Any doubts?
Either they understood nothing. They were both.
Madam, you're such a beautiful, great teacher. You understood everything. I think after this class, many of them might take up oculoplasty for the fellowship.
It's a wonderful specialty, I have to tell you. It is not only eyes, it's the whole body that you're treating with oculoplasty and oncology.
Yeah. Especially oncology is something.
Yes. And it gives a lot of satisfaction, actually.
Okay. If
no questions.
You can
I think officially I shall give
something to madam. Have you got only thank you? I have a lot of thank you messages.
I will give you my address.
Okay, madam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Actually, Dr. Sujit was supposed to join.
Sujit sir was supposed to give the vote of thanks, and so I do the task. I think I don't. To be frank, I don't have enough words to thank you. This has been a very wonderful session and very interactive session, and everybody felt they were literally sitting in a classroom, I guess, and talking to their teacher.
That is the case. I'm happy.
And of course, I would like to thank our KOS President Vijayalakshmi Madam and all the KOS Scientific Committee members who are always there to support us, and all the postgraduates who have attended this session. And I think I should give a special thanks to Sujit sir, even though he is usually he ends up in giving thanks. He is the man behind the show, arranges everything picture perfect, to the point, and unfortunately, I won't say unfortunately, he had to get in for a keratoplasty at this time. So that is the reason why he's not here. Okay. So on behalf of our secretary and on behalf of KOS, thank you so much, Pyrus Madam, and
thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. And thanks to all of you students who actually came and sat here.
Yes,
yeah, it's been
nice. This was the 7th module of our PG clinical series. This is the last module. We had cornea, neurophthalm, glaucoma, pathology, microbiology.
Okay.
Everything we had. They learned a lot of orbital things in our pathology sessions also.
Session,
yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't put much of oncology because, otherwise it would have been too much of a...
Yeah, madam, naturally. Yeah, we are concerned more with PGs rather than...
Yeah.
So this is what's required for the exam point of view.
Yes.
Okay.
So Dr. Srishti Shreya has asked, I missed the first half. Where can I get the recorded video?
And the YouTube link will be there. We are actually recording. And it will be aired in the YouTube under
we'll be sharing all the
KOS channel.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, madam.
Madam.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, madam. Good night.